Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, following years of protests, President Joe Biden finally announced debt relief up to $20,000, leaving advocates questioning whether these changes are enough. A senior strategic organizer for RootsAction joins me to discuss the state of student loan debt. Why are advocates still asking Biden to cancel all student debt loans completely? Then, maternal mortality is a major concern affecting our country, as Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related issues. Founder of Ashe Birthing Services joins me to discuss how New York City Mayor Eric Adams has signed 7 bills that are made to lower maternal mortality rates amongst Black women. Why does maternal mortality remain a long-time concern for many African American women? After that, following multiple protests, thousands of cab owners will finally see debt relief with a new program aimed to provide a city-backed guarantee on restructured loans. A yellow medallion taxi cab driver joins me to discuss the program. Why are New York City cab drivers facing debt? And finally, elected leaders join the fight against climate change as they introduce the Inflation Reduction Act. The CEO of Urban Green Council joins me for a discussion on the act and the impact it'll have on our community. How will the Inflation Reduction Act combat issues of climate change facing our country? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. After years of protests, President Joe Biden finally announced debt relief for up to $10,000 in federal education and up to $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients who meet the income threshold. Despite this shift in student debt relief, many are questioning whether these changes are enough. Senior Strategic Organizer for RootsAction, India Walton, joins me to discuss the state of student debt loans. India, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Kibin. Thank you for having me.
Now, what was your initial reaction when the cancellation of student loans up to $20,000 was announced?
It's like if you ask your mom for pizza for dinner and instead you get broccoli. It's still food, but it's not what we asked for, and it's definitely not as good as what advocates and activists have been asking for.
Now, do you think the $10,000 to $20,000 cancellation was helpful at all?
I think it is helpful. There are a lot of borrowers who have less than $10,000 in student debt. I think that expanding the amount to $20,000 for Pell recipients who tend to be on the lower income end of the spectrum is good policy, but means testing an application in the bureaucracy is going to keep a lot of folks who would otherwise qualify from being able to pursue the cancellation is going to cause some barriers to access for many people.
Now, could you give us a little background on this? What is the typical amount of student debt that many people are facing today?
Well, it depends on who you are, right? It depends on the demographic. But we do know that African American women, Black women, tend to carry a heavier student debt loan than other parts of the population. So that's why it's important to me to see that we go one step further and just provide more, not only more relief, but also just deal with the predatory loan system and also tuition costs and make sure that folks can access higher education at low or no cost.
Now, many people aren't impressed, with the news of 10 to 20K. Although helpful, people weren't impressed because the Biden administration made huge promises. Can you explain what some of those promises were?
We thought that 50K was the low bar. we were asking for full cancellation of all student debt across the board without means testing. But at the very least, on the campaign trail, it did sound to us like 50K would be the low bar, and we saw the bar move even lower than that. But what this cancellation has proven is that it can happen by executive order. So we're looking forward to um, see what happens further down the line.
Now, you just mentioned that you were thinking 50K would be on the low end. And so to hear 10K, I'm sure that's like, whoa, that's a lot lower than what we were expecting. Can you just explain why this student debt relief just simply isn't enough?
Well, you know, people in our generation, in my generation, have been told that if you go to college, that's your entryway into the American dream. And we have just seen housing costs skyrocket, healthcare costs skyrocket. Folks who are delaying major life decisions like home ownership or even furthering their education or starting families because they're strapped with exorbitant amount of student loan debts. And when you think about certain fields who it's not paying off for them. So I think that the closer we can get folks to zero student debt, the better it is for the economy, the better it is for American morale, and the better it is for Democrats going into the midterms.
Now, although many people are disappointed, they're saying that they're not surprised by this move, calling it business as usual Democratic Party policymaking. And your organization also feels Democrats in Congress could be doing so much more. Can you tell me a little bit more about your stance on this?
Sure. Our stance is not only do we want to see full cancellation that's not means tested, but we also have to do something about the high price of education in this country. We definitely know that nations thrive more with an educated citizenry. So we want to see Congress not only take further steps to relieve student loan debt, but also to make sure that tuition is fair and that higher education can be accessed for free.
And do you think that people maybe have a right to feel a little bit disappointed in Democrats? I know a lot of people were assuming or expecting this party to kind of come through when it came to student debt cancellation.
When you have super majorities, we especially those of us on the progressive left expect for work to get done and boundaries to get pushed, and instead we still get the same lackluster sort of responses, right? Instead of 50K, we got 10K in student debt cancellation. The infrastructure bills and climate bills are not as robust as we would want them to be. We saw the overturning of Roe. So we really are expecting our Democratic delegation to be able to deliver for the folks who keep electing them over and over again, thinking that we're going to see some real progress. And I think it's about time they deliver on that.
Now, your organization categorized student loan debt as a racial justice issue. Can you please explain why?
Sure. I wrote an op-ed. It's on Common Dreams that talks about a saying that if America has a cold, then the Black community has the flu, and that tends to be true in all areas of our society, whether it's health outcomes or unemployment rates. Black folks get it just a little bit, if not a lot worse. And generational wealth gaps have meant that when Black people do pursue higher education, more often than not, we are reliant on student loans, not only to pay tuition and buy books, but to also just keep our families afloat while we attend school.
Now, you talked about generational wealth. Would you say that contributes to why it's a little bit challenging for Black borrowers to repay their student loans?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first I want to reiterate that wealthy people don't take out student loans. They don't have to because they have the money to pay tuition, right? But I mean, you know, there are studies that show that even with the bachelor's degree, Black women make significantly less than their white counterparts, male counterparts. So student loan cancellation is definitely a racial justice issue, along with all of the other systems that keep Black people from upward mobility in society, and student loans is just one of those things.
Now, are there any new or different student debt loan full cancellation proposals that you may have or are thinking of?
We don't have any proposals. We are really supporting the work and the foundation that have been laid by Strike Debt and their student loan campaign, and they actually have campaigns to cancel all kinds of debts. So I would suggest that folks follow the Debt Collective, um, and I think that the next step is to work with our congressional delegation and legislators to figure out how we make higher education free for most people.
Now, I'm curious to know, why do you think this has just been such an ongoing challenge? And even when it seems like we're making progress, we look at what it is and it's like, oh, we're still not there yet. Why do you think it's taking so long?
Um, we have a society where everything is a commodity, and if people feel like they're going to make less money, even if it's the right thing to do, there's a reluctance to get it done. So long and short of it is capitalism.
Now, how can people learn more about what they currently qualify for?
Sure. You can visit studentaid.gov. You can go to our page at progressivehub.net/ without student debt. And you can also follow RootsAction on Twitter.
And can you just let everybody know a little bit more about your organization and what you guys do?
Sure. We do a lot of digital organizing and advocacy work concerning anti-war and anti-nuclear efforts, and also things that focus on racial, social, and economic justice.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your organization's work in regards to student loan debt and stuff like that?
Sure. We act as a support in getting the word out about student loan cancellation. We are running petitions. We are encouraging folks to call the president and call their congresspeople about this, and just being a conduit to continue to spread the word about what's available.
And I'm so glad you actually mentioned that, because I wanted to know, like, what else can people do to make their, because it seems like we're doing so much already. What can people do even further to kind of hit home that, like, we need full student loan cancellation?
Yeah, I think that we just continue to put pressure on the administration, put pressure on your Congress folks to get this done. If you can, write letters, make phone calls, and go sign that petition. I think that the fact that we began this campaign with the president saying that there was really nothing that could be done about it, to seeing him use executive action is proof that the pressure of the public actually works. So we have to keep the pressure on and keep demanding more.
Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization?
Sure. You can find us at rootsaction.org, or again, follow this campaign at progressivehub.net/ without student debt.
All right, India, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. A moment that should be a joyous, life changing experience could be a life threatening one for many Black and Brown women. Maternal mortality is a major concern affecting our country, as Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy related issues. Founder of Ashe Birthing Services, Emilie Rodriguez, joins me to discuss New York City laws meant to lower maternal mortality rates amongst Black women. Emily, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can we first just start off talking about, maternal mortality and what that actually is?
Yeah, maternal mortality is the death of a woman or birthing person in pregnancy, birth, or up to 6 weeks postpartum.
Now, I'm curious to know, is this something that happens often? Like, is it a high possibility that when you go into birth that this could be an outcome?
I would say statistically no, but it's higher than what it should be. Nationally, the average of Black women dying, in childbirth is 3 times white counterparts. But in New York City, where you would think we would have the best outcomes in the world, it's one of the worst for an industrialized nation. And so, our maternal mortality rates are about 3 years behind, and those are 8 to 12 times white counterparts.
Wow. Now, can you explain why this has been a long time issue and concern for many African American women?
Well, it's not because of social determinants of health. It's not because, just our race. It's really racism within the medical industrial complex, also known as the hospital.
Wow. Now, I know that a lot of Black and Brown women fear giving birth in hospitals due to neglect, and it could be that racism that you're talking about. Can you just explain how this is linked to the many years of systemic racism within the health system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that starting with the eradication of midwives in the 1920s and the start of like medical schools, we started getting away from, really important information that we knew about birth. And doctors and training, miss important parts, like actual informed consent, which I often don't see happening in the hospital, learning how to diagnose things based off of people's skin color. They only learn off of white skin. Um, so I think that like that paired with implicit biases, we see racism within the school, and then also that translates into the hospital. And so neglect is just one part of how racism manifests in the hospital system. But, when we see people like Beyonce and Serena almost dying in childbirth, we know that it's not because of other factors. It's really just racism.
I'm really glad that you pointed that out because I know a lot of people tend to just automatically think this is possibly like a low income issue or something that's only facing low income people. But you just mentioned that two of like, the hugest celebrities in the world also face this. I'm curious to know, I know that I've heard like, throughout my classes that a lot of health professionals think that Black people have a different pain tolerance or, there's a lot of things that relate to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's from slavery. We do not experience pain differently. We are not super women in the way that they're talking about. And, I think that something that's really important is with birthing people, we know our bodies. We know our bodies. And so this should be a collaborative relationship with our medical providers, whether it's a midwife or an obstetrician, because there are midwives in hospital systems as well. And so I think that it's important that people do the individual work to perform the proper care so that they're listening to all of their patients and they're recognizing that everybody has implicit biases and it doesn't make you a bad person. But, there's a lot of unlearning to do, if you were brought up in this system. And it's our responsibility to do it, so that people are listened, they're believed, and therefore we can have better outcomes. I think that the city is trying to say that like doulas are the answer. And while we are a really pretty band-aid, I don't think that, we're an answer for racism within the medical industrial complex. So we do our best to, triage, if you will, the situation to help, this pandemic, really.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because that kind of leads into my next question. I know that Mayor Eric Adams is in the process of signing 7 bills created to lower maternal mortality, and I know that doulas is a part of that. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that the council has worked really hard, and it's being pushed by Jamal Williams and also Bronx Borough President um, Vanessa Gibson. And she means business. I think that as soon as she started office, she reached out to all the local doulas and midwives in the Bronx and was like, okay, how can we solve this problem? And so I'm appreciative of these laws. I know that they've worked really hard on them. I think that they're a great start, although I absolutely have critiques and things that I would like to see amended.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the critiques? Because I've also seen this work, and in my time, I've heard a lot of people say amazing things about doulas. Can you just tell us a little bit why you were kind of have these thoughts that you're having?
Well, I think one thing that pertains to my field is that, doulas are independent, they're like independently contracted, they're self-employed. We don't represent anyone but the person who hires us, the family that hires us, right? So it becomes a little problematic when like hospitals are employing doulas because then, whose agenda are we serving here, right? Is it the hospital policy that they don't want us to counter that's not evidence based, or is it our clients' wishes and our clients' desires and our clients' voice that we're advocating for? So I think when I see certain things about regulating doulas, training doulas, I naturally have questions about who's doing those trainings, how are we regulating doulas, and if we should be doing that at all, which I don't think we should. But I do think that all of these bills have a beautiful voice and a start, and are going to make a big difference. And I'm happy. Like this is not a new issue. This is something that we've all been fighting for decades. I'm really happy to see it at the forefront of our news today.
Now, for those who don't know, can you just tell us what doulas are and how they may differ from trained nurses?
Yeah, so a nurse, a midwife, an obstetrician, those are all medical professionals that, do amazing different jobs. Doulas are non medical professionals that provide information, physical support, emotional support, mental support, sometimes spiritual support, and advocacy for people during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And so that looks different for every family depending on their needs and where they are in life. And so we kind of become like a best friend for people during that period that knows how to navigate the system, that knows who to go to that's safe, where to get a VBAC in New York City, or where to, what options you have. A lot of times when people are pregnant, they don't even know that they have options because they go in for a pregnancy test to confirm pregnancy. And they're like, okay, great, we'll see you on Monday at this doctor's office. But you have options, that no one is telling you. So unless you have a doula, which is not very many people, or you have a friend that's telling you, oh girl, like you can go to a hospital, you can go to a birthing center, you can have a home birth, right? A lot of times people don't know what their options are, and doulas help fill in that gap.
Now, I know you mentioned in an article that only 7% of people in New York City have doulas. And despite, having so many amazing qualities, why do you think that these services are so low, especially in New York City?
Well, I would say that the word doula might be new, but the traditions around like being a birth worker are not. They used to be our aunties, our mothers, our grandmothers, our neighbors that would care for us, during this period. And the history and the traditions were rich. We knew about pregnancy, we knew about birth, we weren't afraid of it. Nowadays, with like really bad sex education growing up, there's a really big learning curve when it comes to pregnancy. A lot of people don't know very much about it until they're actually in that situation. And they don't know about doulas either. So I think that that's an access problem. And I think that we're starting to hear more and more. I'm getting into conversations with people where they're like, oh, you're a doula, that's amazing. Whereas before I would have to explain from scratch. So I think that it's becoming more and more known, but I think the thing that people don't know is that it's not a luxury item, that doulas in New York City, we barter, we do sliding scale. There are free doulas from the Doula Initiative Project in New York City, now under Mayor Adams. There's a lot of grassroots work that's happening, and you can get a doula at any budget. And it's really a birthright to have support in birth.
I'm so happy that you mentioned that, because I know the first time I heard it, it was, in a television show, and the women were rich. So I thought it was definitely something only available to rich women. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Can you just explain the importance of having a birthing advocate, or just knowing how to advocate for yourself when you're giving birth?
Absolutely. Like I said, in 10 months of pregnancy, there's a lot to learn. And so I think that a lot of folks think that they can go into a hospital and they're going to be taken care of the way that they want, and that they're going to trust their provider fully. But as you see with these statistics, you really need representation. And I don't know anybody, even myself, who could properly advocate in active labor. And partners, if someone has one, they don't necessarily know what to advocate for either. And so these are all conversations that we're having during prenatals together, and getting to know each other, like walking together in pregnancy, so that I know when you're in the labor room, what your desires are. If there's previous sexual trauma and it's really important to you to be spoken to before about what someone's doing to you before they do it, for example, which is very common. Or it's really important to me that no one's yelling at me. Or skin to skin is really important, because I want my baby to have delayed cord clamping and all of their blood after giving birth. And I don't want anyone to cut the cord prematurely. I want to make sure that evidence-based information or evidence-based science is being practiced. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch my own medical care and, give birth. Or if they are feeling symptoms, to be aware of it. And, even though we're not medical professionals, we definitely don't have the luxury in as we're discussing, in just being that. We know a lot of medical knowledge. We know what to look out for. We know what the signs are. And so having, a fresh pair of eyes that is looking out for only your health, does not have 9 other patients, to make sure that you are not just alive, because I feel like that's the bar that we talk about with outcomes, is
Right.
well, is the birthing person alive? And I think that that's a really low bar.
Right.
It's important to talk about, do you feel safe? Do you feel well taken care of? Did you feel empowered through this experience and this huge transition into motherhood or parenthood? And I think that that's where we really fill in the gap there.
All right, Emilie, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Also, if I could just add one thing, is that okay?
Hum?
Can I
Oh,
add
yeah,
one
you
thing?
can add it. Yes, quickly.
Okay. So, in addition to talking about, all these problems that New York City has, I think it's also important to talk about solutions. And one of the solutions that we created is the Bridge Directory. And that's how Black and Brown birthing people in New York City can find providers of color that understand their culture, that speak their language. And it's a completely free resource. So I would love to let New York City and the Bronx know about that.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. After intense protests, thousands of cab owners and drivers will finally see debt relief with a program aimed to provide a city-backed guaranteed on restructured loans. Yellow Medallion cab driver John Asmah joins me to discuss the life-changing program. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Now, can you just tell me a little bit about the organization New York City Taxi Workers Alliance?
New York City Taxi Workers Alliance represent yellow cab drivers and also including app drivers too, for our interest and to fight for our just causes.
Now, I know that it can be confusing for a lot of people, including myself. Can you just tell us what the difference between a taxi cab medallion owner and like maybe an Uber driver? What are the differences between these type of ride services?
Okay, the difference is that yellow cab taxi cab medallion owner owns a medallion sold by the city. It's an investment. Before Uber came into existence, Uber drivers just have a car and they get their orders from Uber. So we are totally two different entities. Uber is based on app, we are street hail, and for better or worse, also app some of the app system. But we have a totally different because of our mortgage of the medallion, which the city holds the lease on it.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about this medallion? Is it actually like a physical thing? Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, medallion is a physical thing. It's that plate that whenever you see a yellow cab, it's on top of the hood. That represents the taxi medallion plate. And that plate is what it's all about. And before Uber came into existence, we were the sole street hail, moving people, millions of people every day to and from their work and wherever you are from the airport. You know, we're the gatekeeper of the city before Uber came into existence. And it was a plate that was sold to us, it was an investment that the city of New York sold to us as an investment, and we bought into it as operate as a yellow cab medallion.
Wow, thank you so much. No, you can continue.
Uber doesn't have that. Uber is just an app system, and Yellow Medallion it's been in existence since God knows 18 or 1933 or something like that, and it's been the iconic New York City transportation system throughout the years.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say thank you so much for sharing that because I've seen it all the time, but I had no idea like what that meant. So thank you for sharing and kind of letting people know something that we've seen. We kind of know a little bit about what it is.
Yeah, and also you see the medallion plate number on that plate. That is the key. That is the catalyst of New York City medallion. Without that, the person is not operating as a New York City medallion.
Now, can you talk a little bit more about why so many of those drivers are facing debt?
Okay, before Uber came into existence, every 4 or 5 years you have to buy a new car, whether the car is still good or not good. And as time goes on, the debt rises based on the cost of operating the medallion. But until Uber came on, we were able to manage it. and everything was fine. But the city of New York and probably the state of New York exacerbated the problem when Uber came into existence. And they gutted the market with close to about 120,000 cars. And because of that, our commitment or the promise that the city made to us that we will be the sole street hail diminished. And we had all this mortgage behind our back. An average mortgage is like a house on our back, and things exacerbated, and the pandemic also took its turn, and this is where we are now. Because in order to operate as a medallion owner, you have to buy this exorbitant medallion plate, and the city was telling them from, I believe, Mayor Giuliani to Bloomberg.
Now, I understand that the average debt is currently over $500,000 with average monthly payments at $3,000. How is this currently affecting the lives of so many drivers like yourself?
Well, you can imagine, first of all, our bottom line, our way of operation, our street hail has been drastically reduced by the app system, and an influx of 120,000 cars versus 13,500 yellow medallion cars. So if your base of operation or financial base of operation has been drastically taken from you, obviously you won't be able to operate the way you were operating before. And I don't know whether the city thought about it or the state thought about it, that bringing all these things coming in will create more congestion, and it also would diminish the value of the medallion and exacerbate the problem. I mean, it was economics 101, but somewhere along the lines, somebody dropped the ball and they ignore us, and with the fact that we have a mortgage that we have to pay, we have taxes that we have to pay. Our overhead was so astronomical compared to an Uber driver or an Uber driver who can even buy a used car, 5 or 6 or 7-year-old used car, and start to operate it the same day. A yellow cab, you can't do that. You have to go and buy the car physically and transform it to the iconic yellow cab, and with the specificity, because taxi and limousine doesn't allow you to choose the car of your choice. They have a certain cars that you have to buy, whether you like it or not. If you want to be in that game, you have to operate. App cars don't have that limitation. They can buy any car, they can buy any used car and start operating. So you are putting two different entities into the same market that you, the taxi and limousine, promise us to do our business, and you have what you call the chaos and unfairness
Now,
in a fair way.
Now, I understand that drivers have now received the Medallion Relief Program Plus. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that program and what it's offering?
Okay, the Medallion Relief Program is called the MRP. For years, we've been asking for relief based on what has transpired financially. And finally, we are able to reach that milestone from the city. The city of New York has promised. It started with the former mayor, and now our new mayor, Eric Adams, has propelled it to where it is now. And for better or worse, the same Taxi and Limousine, TLC, has expedited on fast track to a point whereby some of my colleagues will be going for closing on starting on the 19th of this month. And I think about 2,000, almost 2,100 people have already signed up for their closing. And it entails, it's simple, that the city will pick up the banks will reduce the mortgage, whatever mortgage you have as an individual driver, to $200,000, and the city will grant you $30,000 relief, and for 7.3% for 25 years, and 1234, $1,234 a month for the next 25 years. And once you are approved and you sign this thing, you are set for that. Also, it is guaranteed. Guaranteed means that you will not be liable in case you default. Let's just say after 5 years or something happened to you or something happened to your family, they won't come after your family estate to recover the remaining, balance of the $170,000. So at this stage, we are grateful that the city has recognized our moving forward with this debt forgiveness for yellow cab, because yellow cab is iconic and it's part of New York. Our system are here because of technology, but we've been around and we are evolved. And I've never seen anybody that sees a yellow cab and is not happy. I've traveled so many places, and then whenever they see me, it's like the American flag. I'm happy to see you. Take me to point A to point B. They know I will drive you nice and safe to your destination. So the city cannot afford to lose sight of the importance of New York City medallion yellow cabs in our region here, throughout the tri-state, I would say, because we go all over the places. I will add, and I've had my share of it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me, John. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. What was once considered an issue for the future has quickly become a current concern as many local and elected leaders join the fight against climate change. The Inflation Reduction Act is one of many efforts used to address the effects of climate change. Joining me now for discussion on the Inflation Reduction Act is CEO of Urban Green Council, John Mandyck. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kibin. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Inflation Reduction Act?
The Inflation Reduction Act is huge, Kibin. It represents the single largest investment in energy efficiency in the history of our country. And the broad goal here is to reduce our climate emissions 40% by 2030. This is exactly the type of action we need to combat the climate crisis that we see each and every day here in New York City and across the world.
Now, I know there are so many ways the Act will combat issues of climate change, but can you just highlight a few that kind of stood out to you?
Well, for me, what stands out is a $9 billion investment in energy efficiency. This is for appliances, for systems within a building, a home, an office, to encourage people to use less energy. When we use less energy, we burn less fossil fuels at power plants. And when we burn less fossil fuels at power plants, we reduce carbon emissions and climate change overall. So this investment in energy efficiency is really, really important, and one that will move the needle significantly in our work to stem the worst effects of climate change.
Okay, so just to clarify, you may have touched on it, but I know the Act will support the transition to clean energy, lowering energy costs for people across the country. Is that kind of like what you're talking about right now?
Well, there's those two separate things going on there. The first is the Act will move our sources for electricity to renewable sources that don't burn carbon. That's important. But that's going to take time. Those are big infrastructure projects that we need. In the interim, we have to reduce the amount of energy that we use for the existing fossil fuel electrical plants. And that's what the energy efficiency piece is about. So there's two really important components going on here. First is how do we move to cleaner energy overall? And then in the process of doing that, how do we use less energy as a society?
Now, I'm curious to know, do you think this will encourage more Americans to reduce their carbon footprint?
Absolutely, in a number of ways. Let's just keep on the discussion we've been talking about. When Americans invest in energy efficient appliances, heating systems, cooling systems, hot water systems in their home, they're going to be reducing their carbon footprint. That's important for places like New York City. 70% of our carbon emissions come from buildings. And so when we reduce the amount of energy we're using in those buildings, we make a huge difference when it comes to climate change.
Now, I'm curious to know, do those appliances tend to be a little bit more expensive, or is that just a misconception?
Well, there's an acquisition cost, right? And so what we have to do in New York is we have to replace steam-based radiator systems with electrical heat pumps. Today, those radiator systems are burning fuel, oil or natural gas in the basement of the building, creating carbon emissions right there on the site. And by the way, creating health pollutants by burning those fuels. When we plug those systems into the electrical grid that becomes green over time, we reduce that carbon footprint. So there is an acquisition cost to buying those new heating and cooling systems. And the Inflation Reduction Act provides big incentives to do that, up to $4,000, for example, to install an energy efficient heat pump into those homes and apartments to replace the steam or fossil fuel based systems that are there today.
That kind of leads to my next point. Like, I know the bill is expected to assist Americans economically as well with the creation of new jobs and funding for lower income communities. Can you explain why this was important to add?
Well, sure. I mean, we need to transition our economy to green jobs, and this law will do that. It will create significant demand for building retrofits for these appliances that we've been talking about, and somebody has to do all that good work. And so it's going to create jobs, great jobs, green jobs in the installation of heat pumps and retrofitting buildings and making buildings more energy efficient. On top of that, it directs resources where they're needed to low to moderate income communities and environmental justice communities. I mean, just alone, the EPA will provide $4.5 billion in block grants for environmental justice projects in environmental justice communities. And so those are things that we have to encourage with electrification, with ways that we can promote health while reducing climate impacts at the same time.
So we talked a little bit about the buildings, and I just got this idea. I know that a lot of the buildings in New York City are very, very old. I think some are like even from like maybe the 80s or even earlier. Can you explain how challenging will that be to kind of update it and make it more green?
Sure. 90% of the buildings we'll have in New York City are the buildings we have. I'm sorry, let me start over. 90% of the buildings we'll have in 2050 in New York City are the buildings we have today. So if we want to reduce our carbon footprint for the long term in New York City, we have to look at our existing buildings. And some of them are 100 years old, 200 years old. So it's a challenge for sure, but it's not impossible. And laws like the IRA provide the tools necessary and frankly, the funding necessary to help us to tackle those big challenges.
Now, environmental justice leaders like Congressman Richie Torres cites pollution and similar environmental issues as one of the many causes of poor health in communities like the Bronx. How does the act address the issue of environmental racism and the disproportionate health effects it has on low-income communities?
Yeah, I'm really excited that the act is starting to address this issue, which is long overdue. 3 quick examples. I'd mentioned this before, but there's $4.5 billion for electrification in low to moderate income communities. That's to help people do exactly what we were talking about, move from fossil fuel-based heating systems to electrical heating systems. There's $3 billion in block grants from the EPA to do projects in environmental justice communities that can address health along with climate. And there's another $1 billion from HUD to improve the sustainability and affordable housing. And those are just a few categories. So the act is really significant from that standpoint.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about fossil fuels because I know when we have these conversations, that comes up a lot. And it tends to be one of New York City's biggest challenges in the fight against climate change. What are some ways New York City contributes to the creation of fossil fuels?
Sure. Well, our biggest issue in New York are buildings. So if you think of all of the climate emissions in New York City, 70% come from buildings. And then 20% more or a little bit more comes from transportation and then some from waste. So when you talk about reducing the effects of climate change in New York, you have to talk about reducing the use of fossil fuels used by buildings. And buildings use fossil fuels in 2 ways. They use it for lights and power. So when you turn on a switch that for electricity, that powers a power plant that could be 100 miles away that's producing the electricity. That power plant is burning natural gas that's creating the climate emission. That's a fossil fuel. The second way that buildings contribute to this is what we've been talking about is for heating and hot water. So in the basements of our buildings, particularly our residential buildings, we're burning oil or natural gas, which are fossil fuels, to create heat and hot water. Actually, that application right there is our single largest source of carbon emissions in New York City. It's from furnaces, boilers, and hot water heaters that are providing the heat and hot water for the city.
Now, I know your organization actually contributed to some of the changes that we are hopefully going to see. Can you explain when New Yorkers can expect to see these changes?
Sure. I mean, the changes have already started. And we have 2 big laws that are guiding us from a buildings perspective. So we have Local Law 97, which is a world-leading law that places carbon caps on large buildings in New York City to reduce those climate emissions. Those caps start in 2024, so that's not that far away. And then we have Local Law 154, which phases out fossil fuels in new construction. And that's coming on board too. And so we have these 2 big laws that'll impact the buildings community that are right on our doorstep.
And I understand that this is not going to include places like restaurants or hospitals. Can you quickly explain why?
Sure. Well, I think you're referring to Local Law 154, which is the phase out of fossil fuels on new construction. There are a couple categories where alternatives aren't available yet, or you need that assured backup power. So in a hospital, you want backup power for resiliency, and that backup power might come from a fossil fuel. And so that's the reasoning behind hospitals, is for resiliency and also some specialty labs. When it comes to restaurants, in some cases, we don't have electrical alternatives across the board yet for all commercial restaurant cooking equipment. And so it's a matter of time for technology to catch up.
Now, I think this is a really great start. Can you just let everybody know what they can do to stay in touch with your organization and probably learn some tips on what they can do in their personal lives to be a little bit more environmentally friendly?
Sure. Well, visit our website, urbangreencouncil.org. We spend a lot of time on our website making sure that we're providing the right data at the right place at the right time to help people understand the role we can take with the buildings community to reduce carbon emissions overall.
That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.